Well, tonight I want to talk to you about principles of Christian administration. And some of you may be thinking, well, I don't need that. I don't have any leadership. But what I've noticed through the years is that as you go from Wildwood, you will become a leader. And so some are already leaders here, but others of you will become leaders. Even those that don't think you'll be leaders, because you know things that the average Seventh-day Adventist does not know. Just back it up to the first slide. And so I thought it would be worth sharing some things that I learned when I first came to Wildwood. I had a class from Elder Frazee, and it was called Christian Administration. And of course, in one talk, I can't share it all with you, but I will share the heart, what I think really changes the way we manage people from the way that we were born with. All of us were born in the wrong way of managing people, and however long we worked in the world, or even unfortunately in Adventist institutions, the management has been. That's still not the first slide. You have to go backward up to the first line. There you go. So what I find is, that the older people are when they come to self-supporting work, the more difficult it is for them to switch over. But I was blessed. I came in my 20s, and so I was able to change fairly quickly. Not that I am a perfect example of a leader, but I know that I changed a lot of things. Thank you. And so I want to share some of that with you. We'll start with Luke chapter 9, verse 52 to 56. And sent messengers before his face. And they went and entered into a village of the Samaritans to make ready for him. So Jesus was going to come, and he wanted the things to be made ready. And they did not receive him, because his face was as though he would go to Jerusalem. Now, perhaps most of you know that there was no kindness between the Jews and the Samaritans. The Jew, we know this from the woman at the well, would not even ask a favor of a Samaritan. And so you can imagine the attitude of the Samaritans toward the Jews. And so the people said, well, listen, he's not making us a priority. He's just on his way to Jerusalem. So they did not receive him. And when his disciples, James and John, saw this, now they had been trained with worldly administration. So notice what they said. They said, Lord, wilt thou that we command fire to come down from heaven and consume them, even as Elias did? Boy, we're not going to tolerate this disrespect. And they wanted fire to be coming down from heaven. But he turned and rebuked them and said, Ye know not what manner of spirit ye are of. For the Son of Man is not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them. So the worldly administration is to whip people into line and punish them if they don't get in line. Jesus said, no, that's not the reason I came. I came to be able to save people. So there's one of the evidences about the disciples. So if, as you listen to this, you find that you've been a little bit like the worldly leader, those of you that are leaders already, don't feel bad. You're in good company. We're reading about the disciples. You know, they had to learn Christian administration. They were used to the other kind, but they were supposed to learn Christian administration. They had the best teacher as well. In Luke 9:46 and 48, it says, which was just before what I just read to you, then there arose a reasoning among them, that's the disciples, which of them should be the greatest? And he said unto them, he that is least among you all, the same shall be great. In other words, the person who thinks that they are very small, that's the one that makes the best leader. The one that was like Saul in the beginning, you know, God was going to make him king, and he didn't think that was a good choice at all. So he hid among the camels when it was time. But wow, did he ever change once he got the power. Anyway, Jesus is trying to introduce them to a totally different method of management. And of course, he exhibited it in his own life all the way through. We can read it that way as well. In Matthew 23:11 and 12, it says, he that is greatest among you shall be your what? Your servant. Leadership is a call to service. And as I was thinking about all this, you've probably seen the flow charts where whoever the top leader is, you know, there's different names for the top leader in an organization. And we put that person at the top, and then it goes down and eventually gets to the individual worker in each department. And as I was studying this concept, I said, well, that's not even the right concept. The one that's the leader should be on the bottom. Because the leader's job is to serve everybody that's there. That's their work. And whosoever shall exalt himself shall be abased, and he that shall humble himself shall be exalted. You know, we have our so-called sanctified ways of getting attention so we get elected to positions. But Jesus' plan is the exact opposite. It says anybody that thinks they should be able to do it is probably not ready. It's the one who is humble that is ready. And I've also noticed that people tend to elect individuals who are not all that humble. But they have ways of impressing people why they should be a leader. And so that's the exact opposite. whosoever shall exalt himself shall be abased, and he that shall humble himself shall be exalted. And we're gonna experience this literally under the latter rain. God is going to move out everybody that was able to capture an office but wasn't really leading like Jesus wanted them to. And he's going to put in the humble into the positions of leadership. So if we want to be in leadership at the end of time, we need to really welcome every opportunity to become more humble. In Luke 22, 24 to 27, there's a little longer dealing with this. And there was also a strife among them, which of them should be accounted the greatest. Did you know that was one of the biggest questions? Because each one thought they should be the top leader. Or they didn't put themselves ahead of Jesus except one, Judas. He thought he was a better leader than even than Jesus. But the rest of them wanted to be on the right hand or the left hand. And they wanted it so bad that James and John even got their mother to go and ask if they could have those positions. And so this is the same problem that Seventh-day Adventists struggle with today. And he said unto them, the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them. I'm sure you've heard the word boss. That's from the world. That concept that somebody is the boss. So anybody that was the leader among the Gentiles, they expected to be able to assert their authority over other people. And they that exercise authority upon them are called benefactors. So, we might call those a different type of leader, but they still have control over with the power they feel they should have. But ye shall not be so. So it's not supposed to be that way. And I don't think they learned it until Pentecost. But fortunately, from the time Jesus died, and then he left, and they had 10 more days, during that last period of time, they actually got it. And so I'm sure that some of us are going to get it. But ye shall not be so, but he that is greatest among you, let him be as the younger. Oh, so somebody that's younger should be respected? Interesting. And he that is chief as he that doth serve. So again, if God calls us to any kind of leadership, whether it's, in the lowliest department, or whether it's a Sabbath school or a church office, the whole purpose for that is to serve. For whether is greater, so he gives an illustration now, he that sitteth at meat or he that serveth? Who's greater? Well, the one that can sit down and be served is usually looked at as being the greater. Is not he that sitteth at meat? So he agrees that's the philosophy. But I am among you as he that serveth. Now, I don't think there'd be any argument Jesus deserves to be the top leader. But he says, I came to serve. And I suppose the epitome of that service was when he washed the disciples' feet, because all of them were too high up to be able to do it. And so Jesus demonstrated that he came to serve. That was the whole purpose of his life, to serve people that were way inferior to himself. But in serving them, he was helping them along the Christian path. So here's a comment on the two systems in Desire of Ages 550, 551. In the kingdoms of the world, position meant self-aggrandizement. If you were a leader, you could get perks. You could get things that other people didn't get. You could have a lot of things that the other people couldn't have, because that was one reason why so many people wanted to be a leader, because they wanted those benefits. The people were supposed to exist for the benefit of the ruling classes. So the common person was there to make the leader look good and to lift him up and to do for him what, needs to be done. Influence. So here are some of the things that give people power. Influence. Some people just have it. I didn't really realize it when I was a teenager, but as I look back after being a leader all these years, looking back, I realized, you know what? Every place I was, even when I was very young, they looked to me as the leader. And yet, when I came into this work, I was never looked upon as being a leader until the Lord made it happen, and then they accepted it. But some of us just have influence. That's just the way it is. Wealth, well, I never experienced that one, but money talks, we say, and when people have money, others will look up to them, and they will do what they want them to do. Then there's education, and this is a big one in our society. If you don't have degrees, then you don't need to be listened to because you don't know what you're talking about. So, but I don't think it's talking about that kind of education. I think it's talking about the right kind that gives a person influence, because when you know things, people can look to you for help. Were so many means of gaining control of the masses for the use of the leaders. So that's what they used: influence, wealth, education, to become the leader. The higher classes were to think. So here's another perk of the leadership. The higher classes were to think, decide, enjoy. So they were wanting these positions so that they could tell people what to do. They could make the decisions that everybody would have to follow, and they would enjoy many things. And rule. The lower were to obey and serve. So if you were not a leader, then your job was to obey and to serve. Religion, like all things else, was a matter of authority. Now, we've just been through one of those situations, and I hope we can learn the lesson from it. Thousands of Seventh-day Adventists lost their jobs, lost their homes as a result of it, because some leaders said, if you choose not to be vaccinated, that's your problem. We're not going to help you. And we don't even want our pastors to help you. So, this is the problem. Religion, like all things else, was a matter of authority. The people were expected to believe and practice as their superiors directed. The right of man as man to think and act for himself was wholly unrecognized. So we're not to treat people, whenever we're in leadership, we're not to treat them like they don't have a right to think what they think. And I've had a lot of experience at people telling me what they think. Christ was establishing a kingdom on different principles. So that's first part is how not to do it. He called men not to authority, but to service. And then it gives us some insight. What does that really mean? The strong to bear the infirmities of the weak. Now, often if we're working on the worldly plan, people that have infirmities or weaknesses, we look down upon them. But God says, no, don't look down on them. Help them. Lift them up. Help their weakness to be overcome. Then it gives a little list. Power. Okay, how are we supposed to use our power? How are we supposed to use our position? How are we to use the talents that we have? And how are we to use the education that we have? Well, it's the same as we read in the beginning. All the power we have is to be used to benefit other people. All the position we have is to benefit other people. The talents God has given us is to share if they can get the same talent, or at least use our talents for the benefit of other people. And whatever education we have is to be used for the benefit of others. If we have those things, it says this would place their possessor under the greater obligation to serve his fellows. So anything we think we have, it puts us under an obligation to help other people either get the same thing or have the benefits of the same thing. To even the lowliest of Christ's disciples, it is said, all things are for your sakes. How much? Everything that any leader has is to be used in service to those that he supposedly is leading. But really we should say those that he's serving. The people that he's serving, he needs to recognize, or she needs to recognize, everything they have is all for the benefit of the people. In the book Education, page 289, it also gives, I forgot to advance it. Thank you for doing that. The parent or teacher who by such instruction trains the child to self-control will be the most useful and permanently successful. Now here what we're seeing a glimpse of is two methods of education. The one method is when we're training the child to manage themselves. You've probably all seen the picture or the live site of a road crew, and they're leaning on their shovels and they're not doing much of anything, and all of a sudden a little truck comes by and everybody's working like everything. Well, we know who came by. But self-control is when people have been trained with self-control, they are different. To the superficial observer, his work may not appear to be the best advantage. In other words, everything's not in perfect order with this kind of a teacher. It may not be valued so highly as that of the one who holds the mind and will of the child under absolute authority, but after years will show the result of the better method of training. So one of the systems of school that's really good at this is called Montessori. And, those students, they're under total control. And you look at the classroom, everybody's quiet, everybody's obedient, everything's the way it ought to be. What this is telling us is that they're not training them for self-control. And yeah, it looks good in the beginning, but in the end, when they get away from you, it's not going to look so good. And the worst of it is the wrong person can gain control of them because they don't have self-control. And so our work as leaders is to help people to have self-control. That's one of the aspects of our work. Now, in Testimonies to Ministers, page 300, it says, God will use ways and means by which it will be seen that he is taking the reins in his own hands. There's a point in history where God says enough is enough. We got to get this work done. And we've got to quit the worldly management, and we've got to get it the right way. And so he takes the reins out of human hands. And it's interesting, it uses the term reins. Because now most of you here have never driven a horse. Is there anybody that has driven a horse? Okay, we got one. Oh, we got more than I thought. Well, you can see why when you drive a horse, why you have to have two reins. And we'll talk more about that later. In Ninth Testimonies, page 257, it says, the world is filled with strife for the supremacy. My idea is best. Put me in charge. The best example we can see is politicians. I mean, it makes me sick to listen to them talk about how great they are. The spirit of pulling away from fellow laborers, the spirit of disorganization is in the very air we breathe. Now, just like on most topics, there's a ditch on this side and there's a ditch on that side. And we've got both, people in both ditches today. So the first ditch we're reading about is a person that can't work with anybody or not much of anybody. They just want to have their own way and do it the way they want to do it. And this attitude is in the very air we breathe today. Nobody wants to cooperate with anybody. By some, all efforts to establish order are regarded as dangerous. And we had that argument when the Adventist Church was organized. Some people said, as soon as we get organized, we'll become a papacy. So let's not organize. But eventually, God had his way and we organized. By some, all efforts to establish order are regarded as dangerous. Why? As a restriction of personal liberty, and hence to be feared as popery. These deceived souls regard it a virtue to boast of their freedom to think and act independently. They declare that they will not take any man's say-so, that they are amenable to no man. I have been instructed that it is Satan's special effort to lead men to feel that God is pleased to have them choose their own course, independent of the counsel of their brethren. So let's put it in an area that's constantly going on today. Somebody thinks they found truth. Well, they don't need to ask anybody. They just need to go out and start preaching it. That's the way they feel. And if someone comes along and says, maybe this needs a little more study, and here's some things you might want to consider as to whether what you're teaching is truth or not, they don't want to hear that. So this is not good either. If we go too far one way or the other way, we get in trouble. And it's Satan, it says very clearly, that's leading people to want to be so independent and feel no need of counseling with leaders before they feel that they have successfully hatched up a new idea. But that goes into a lot of different areas. 9th Testimonies 2:59. The leaders among God's people are to guard against the danger of condemning the methods of individual workers who are led by the Lord to do a special work that but few are fitted to do. So the opposite side of this is that leaders need to be careful about demanding things to be done in a certain way, because not everybody can work in the same way. You're familiar with the story of David wearing Saul's armor, and he said, I can't fight in this armor. I've got to fight in my own way. And so he did, and he was successful. So there's a place to counsel together and talk together, but not to, require control and make people do what you want them to do. Let brethren in responsibility be slow to criticize movements that are not in perfect harmony with their methods of labor. Let them never suppose that every plan should reflect their own personality. Now, if you approach it that way, some of the people will use some methods that aren't the best. But it's better that they learn firsthand it's not best after you've told them. You can instruct them a better way. But if they don't do it, have you noticed that the things you learn by hard experience stick with you longer? On a test, the answers you got wrong, you remember longer than the ones you got right. This is all a part of self-control, training people, on one hand, to listen to counsel, because when they don't listen to it, that is, if it's good counsel, they realize next time maybe I should have. But on the other hand, if it's something that is successful in just a different way, then that's great. Let them not fear to trust another's methods, for by withholding their confidence from a brother laborer who, with humility and consecrated zeal, is doing a special work in God's appointed way, they are retarding the advancement of the Lord's cause. And there must have been a lot of this, because the Lord's cause has been retarded for a lot of years. So here we see the two sides. Now there's a lot more that could be said on both sides, but I don't feel called to give a whole class here, the whole series of classes. So back to the one we read in Testimonies to Ministers, because we've had so much trouble trying to learn Christian administration, and apparently for most people are not going to learn it, and so we have this. Let me tell you that the Lord will work in his last work in a manner very much out of the common order of things. and in a way that will be contrary to any human planning. Just think of the control freaks. They're going to really freak out when this time comes, because they're so used to controlling the work, and it's going every which direction, not the way they think it should go. There will be those among us who will always want to control the work of God. That's kind of sad. I want to be a better learner than that. How about you? I don't want God to have to say this of me. There will be those among us who will always want to control the work of God, to dictate even what movements shall be made when the work goes forward under the direction of the angel who joins the third angel in the message to be given to the world. So we know it's the latter rain that this is talking about. God will use ways and means by which it will be seen that he is taking the reins in his own hands. Now it's interesting, the horse has two reins. And so if we take this literally, we can expect that in Christian administration, there's two channels of God's impressions, two channels. It reminds us of driving a horse. Have you ever tried to get a horse to go where you want it to go, just pulling on one rein? No, he'll go in a circle. Pull on the right hand rein, and he'll go in a circle this way. So you get tired of going in circles, and you start pulling on the other rein, and he just goes in a circle the other way. So this is an illustration that there's two directions that God gives. Another one that's a good example is using a rowboat. They're not very popular. It's mostly canoes nowadays. But at least you may have seen a rowboat. And if you just pull on one oar, it's going to go in a circle. So if you pull on the other one, it goes in a circle the other way. But when you pull two oars together, you go straight ahead. And the same with the horse, you go straight ahead. The same is true about steering a car, except it's a different method. You have to keep the steering wheel in the middle and not go to this side or that side unless you're going around a corner. So, God has put into everyday life examples of his method of control. In a manuscript, 43, 1895, it says the church organization is to be respected, but it is not to be made in any way a galling yoke. Dictatorship, worldly method of organization makes the common people have a galling yoke. And that was not to be the way God wanted it. However, he did want the individual workers to have respect for a church organization or institutional organization, whatever name you put on it. Men are not to assume the prerogative of God and think to rule and coerce and oppress the souls of God's purchased possession. So, one day a young lady came in to my office and she said, I can't work in housekeeping anymore. The chemicals just tear up my hands and I'm allergic to it. And so I said, okay, we'll have to swap you out and put somebody else in. But if we are not willing to be of service, we might take a different approach. And so, we are to learn how to do it the way he wants us. Ninth Testimonies 146, no human being is to seek to bind other human beings to himself as if he were to control them, telling them to do this and forbidding them to do that, commanding, dictating, acting like an officer over a company of soldiers. This is the way the priests and rulers did in Christ's day, but it is not the right way. So, you can look all the way back and find only rare examples of anyone that did it the right way, because we're born thinking and acting the wrong way. And so God has called us to really study the life of Jesus. How did he work with people? How did he lead? And to overcome this. But if we don't overcome it, then we hold back the work of God. Now let me share some of my experience with you. Shortly after I took Elder Frazie's class on Christian administration, I was asked to take charge of what was called the Institute. Now, the Institute responsibilities was to process all applications, to arrange housing for everybody. And I was told, I didn't experience it, but I was told that before I came, every so often, they would have fruit basket upset and everybody had to move to another house and so on. I thought, well, I don't know whether they read Christian administration or not. The leaders had a reason for thinking that would be good. You wouldn't get attached to a house, I guess, if you had to do that. But I was responsible for housing. I was responsible for who worked where in the institution. And of course, problems that would come up with workers, maybe between workers or any other problems with them. So I worked at that till we had a call to pioneer an institution. So as I thought about how do I put into practice Christian administration, here's some of the experiences I had. Someone house would become open, and someone might be interested in going into that house, or I might have a need that I could see would be filled by either putting that person in the house or somebody else in the house. And so I would go to the people involved and I would explain what I thought would be beneficial. And then I asked them to pray about it. Because one reign is what God tells you through leadership. The other reign is what God tells you as an individual. And if we're going to use two reigns, we have to wait till we get the same answer in both channels. If the worker says, well, I don't care what you want, I'm going to stay right here, we may have a problem. If the leader says, I don't care what you want, we don't say it quite that bluntly, but I don't care what you want, you're going to move, or you got to move. Then we don't have the benefit of the two reigns. And so the majority of times, people would accept what I suggested would be the right plan, and they would move. But occasionally they would come back and they would say, no, I don't feel like it's best for me to move. And then I would be tested. Are you going to use this plan? Or are you going to go back to the worldly plan? And tell them, well, I'm sorry that you don't want to move, but you're going to have to move. But somehow the Lord helped me never to do that. And so I thought, oh no, Now what am I going to do? This plan that I had worked out is roadblocked. What am I going to do? But you know what happened? After a little time went by, some other need came up, and I said, praise the Lord, they didn't move, because now I need this for this situation. And I had that experience a number of times, and always God worked it out. I don't remember one where they came back later and said, well, I really do believe the Lord wants me to make a move. But you see, that's possible too, because what we're looking at is to get the same message through both channels. And the individual worker should be praying, even though they already said no, they should still be praying, because it could be that God would convince them later that they should do it, until the whole thing is settled and we get the same answer through leadership and through the individual. Then we know we're on the right path, because we got both reins and we can move straight forward. Well, another responsibility I had was moving our staff from department to department to fill the various needs. And again, most of the time, I would tell someone that, we have a need over here in this department, and would you be willing to fill this need? Pray about it, and see if the Lord is calling you to be there in this department. Because a worker will put far more energy into the department if they feel that's where God wants them to be. And so most of the time it worked fine, but occasionally I had trouble filling a need. And I'll tell you the worst one I ever had, because most of them I'm sure I've forgotten. But we had a need for somebody to do housekeeping in the hospital and lifestyle center. And as I thought over all the staff, I thought of one man that looked, we could move him okay and put him in there. And so I brought him in, and I told him the need and asked him to pray about it. And a lot of people don't like housekeeping, so it's a real test of whether you're willing to let both reins go to work on this. So he came back to me and he said, no, I don't feel called to do that. So I went back to the drawing board, and I thought over all the staff again, and I tried to come up with another answer, but I couldn't come up with another answer. So I called him back in, and I said, are you sure that the Lord isn't calling you? I said, I've tried to find somebody that can fill this post of duty, and I'm not getting an answer. He said, no. And so for the third time, I had to go back. I think the Lord was testing me whether I would change back, because I was a leader before I came to Wildwood. I was in charge of over 100 staff members in an Adventist hospital. And so I was well trained in the worldly method. But I worked again the third time trying to find someone that would fill that job, and I did not succeed. So I called him back in, and I'll have to say I was tempted to say, you're going to have to do it because I don't have another answer. But I refrained, thinking of Christian administration. I called him in. I said, are you really sure that God isn't calling you to do this? Because I have tried this, and I haven't gotten anybody that the Lord is calling to do it. Would you guess? He said yes. And I'll tell you what, he was the best housekeeper we ever had. He knew he was supposed to be in there. The Lord had called him to do it. And he would just make those floors shine the most beautiful of anyone that I had seen up till that time. Of course, we weren't here a long time, I think 3 or 4 years, but it was amazing to see. And what I learned is that God really does have connection with his people. And if they're supposed to do what I as a leader asked them to do, then God could tell them that that's what they were supposed to do. And that I didn't have to, think that I was always right just because I was leader, that I was always right, but that I would try to understand God's will for those that were, under my service. But if I made a mistake, he would help me by giving guidance to the individual worker. And then we'd both have to pray more about this. And I'm sure there were experiences where, other than the housing one, where it worked out that I found out I was the one in the wrong. God had somebody else. I just don't remember any of those. Another problem is letting someone go because they, have faults or whatever. I remember one leader who helped train me. He said they had, at the committee, they had discussed somebody that had been at Wildwood before and wanted to come back. And the committee said, no, they got this fault and this fault and this fault. We don't want them back. And he said to them, the only difference between them and a new worker is the new worker, you don't know their faults, and the old one, you do know their faults. But, our job as leaders is to train people and to help them overcome their faults. And so I made it a rule in my doing that work. I made it a rule. Nobody gets asked to leave unless they come to the place where they think we're bad and that they don't want to listen to what we have to say. They're not willing to be trained. They're not willing to be counseled. And they're just totally rebellious. Then, we tell them, listen, you don't have respect for us, so we hope you'll find somebody that you do have respect for. But I found that, this plan that Elder Frazee presented to us really made happy workers. And it made people feel safe that they were going to be treated in a Christ-like manner. And usually people know if they get so out of line that they need to be sent out, then they already know that that's the way they are, and they're not surprised by, what we have to tell them. We'll close with this from 1901 General Conference Bulletin, page 24. You have no right to manage unless you manage in God's order. So God is very plain how serious this is. Now, please don't look at leaders and see them making mistakes and, criticize them or not to respect them, because everybody has to learn, and some learn slower and some learn faster. But if you have a position of what we call leadership, which is a position of service, make sure you try to do it the way Jesus did it. And he was always serving. And when you serve people and they see that you love them, you really care about them, you're willing to do anything you can for them. When people would come in the office, I would always ask them, what can I do for you? Because I saw my position as a leader was a position of service. And as a leader, you can help people in a lot of ways. You can make their life better. You can make their job better. You can do so many things for them. This is what God has called us to do. What the world calls a step up, for us is a step down, not in the sense of respect, but in a sense of being able to serve more people and to help more people know how to do their job, love to do their job, know that they're appreciated in doing their job. And this is the kind of administration that I believe is going to help us finish the work. And God's going to get it one way or the other. He's going to get it. But I hope he doesn't have to take it out of our hands to get it, but that we will learn it and be able to do it the way he ordained for it to be done.